Eric, in this episode today, you found out some things about me. You found out that it turns out I know a little bit about MMA, and I dropped just about, 80 or 90 names during this discussion. Not a large amount, just very casual this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know how much of a fan you were of MMA, which you know how it is in a relationship. The beauty of it is that you learn new things about your partner all the time.
Right.
So it was a journey of discovery and appreciation for me. However, I do think you owe the Iron Cult an apology.
Oh. So I did say some things, Eric. I did say
things were said.
I'm paraphrasing, but I may have said I've never been super excited to meet any one lifting figure of the Iron Game. And that is because, as we spoke about afterwards, participating in it and because there's a low barrier to entry, you could go backstage and meet most of these people. I've never been that wowed, and there's a special place in my heart, MMA, because I started watching it before I started lifting as a 12-year-old, growing up listening to individuals like Boss Rudin, Steven Quadros, More Ranello with Pride FC, where I'm pretty sure I said in this episode that yes, if I saw Boss Rudin, I would love to get a photo with him. I think he's the man. Whereas I oftentimes, when I meet figures in the strength community, shake their hand and say, "Hey man, what's up?" And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so everyone who listened to that clearly understood that was an apology, and I think we can leave it at that. Yeah, so that was a heartfelt apology, and it expressed to the Iron Cult that you absolutely are ecstatically excited to meet everyone in the Iron Game all the time.
Yeah.
And that your biggest heroes are those who hoist the weights.
Yeah.
And I think at best we could say that MMA is an equal but not overtaking role in your mind of who you look up to and appreciate. Right?
Now, I'm gonna get you Boss Rudin's physique, because he honestly had a really good physique, and I think that's gonna sell you, and you're just gonna come on board, brother. That's how it's gonna work. And I learned, Eric, that you shouldn't apologize for anything, and you actually just steamroll forward. And if anything, doubling down shows that you're not a hypocrite. But I will show, as we said in an episode that's going to be released after this, show one of my more vulnerable sides to you. And yeah, sure. And this is actually true. Check this out, Eric. We speak MMA today. We have one of your buddies, Seth. We have Phil Daru on, S&C coach who coaches a lot of the top MMA fighters. But I'm acting like, I love all this stuff, and I don't have a softer side. And sometimes I harp on my man about LARPing, even though that's not what he does. He plays, what would they be classified? The tabletop games?
That's it. Tabletop role-playing games, and it's like a caste system. Okay, so there's people who play video games. That's pretty much anybody, and that's all good. You can play an RPG.
Right.
They look down on people who actually play tabletop RPG games.
Right.
And listen, we're only one away from the least socially desirable class, so we need someone to have to put our very already not appreciated boot on the neck of, so that we can feel good about ourselves. And that's LARPers. So LARPers are at the bottom of the hierarchy. If it's Snowpiercer, those are the tailies. Okay, we're third class,
right?
And we're gonna hold on to third class. There's gonna be no uniting of the classes. Okay.
Okay. So Eric,
no, we're not the bottom, and that's what we're proud of as tabletop RPGers.
Check this out. Here's what I'm gonna tell you. All right.
Oh boy.
Is I have recently quarantined. So I said Pride FC. I said recently there's an organization, MMA organization called Pride FC. I started rewatching again with my brother during quarantine. It's been a lot of fun. I actually picked up, my man, after 15 years, Magic the Gathering, the card game. Myself and my brother and Eric, they now have Planeswalkers, which they didn't have before. I'm just curious, do you play MTG, my boy?
I have played Magic the Gathering, but I was definitely not like a Magic the Gathering player. I learned how to you tap your land and then you do stuff. But the card game thing, I'd say that's probably even one step above, in the social hierarchy of tabletop RPGs.
So
it's definitely above, because you're just playing a game. Because the thing about true role playing games is you become your character. Like if you are, Grondir the dwarf from the Iron Hills, that's who you are. You make decisions in that perspective. You have an accent that's hopefully not offensive to anyone else who's an actual player and doesn't cross into the real world.
Right.
It's method acting, man. It's not a game. But we don't have actors on today. We have real life professionals in the S&C world of the fight game. You brought up Seth. So this is a good friend of mine, Seth Lenetsky, Dr. Seth Lenetsky. He was doing his PhD at the same time I was. He was doing it on a real sport. I was doing it on, of course, bodybuilding and powerlifting.
The realest sports.
But yeah, exactly. The realist of the real sports. But he has one of the few people in the world who has a PhD in punching mechanics. So he was, putting instrumentation in bags to understand punching force. He has also worked with both boxers, taekwondo athletes, and some MMA fighters over the years. He's been in the game a long time. And it was also really cool that you were recently reached out to by Phil Daru.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Phil Daru is somebody who is now getting on that media game. He has his media team, but he is a former MMA fighter. He's done the damn thing. He won Eric's heart because he said he did a bodybuilding show. He's done powerlifting, West Side, and then he was a fighter, I think, for a handful of years before becoming an S&C coach. He's currently the strength and conditioning coach for American Top Team, which is one of the top MMA organizations producing fighters at this time. And so he kind of trains a lot of the who's of the notable figures in mixed martial arts, the UFC today. And one of the things that I respect, Eric, is that he's always trying to increase his knowledge, the associations that he makes. Recently, actually, I found out, I didn't know this, I watched some of his videos, I enjoyed it, and this conversation is fantastic. It's very interesting to see how, someone that's from the research position, Seth, and then someone from the practical standpoint, not that Seth isn't, Seth actually is currently a S&C coach, so they're both S&C coaches, but how much crossover and similarities there were. But what I liked about Phil is that he's always trying to expand his knowledge, and he told us recently that he actually was on Danny Lennon's either podcast or met up with him and hung out. And it was cool to see him survive that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an experience not everyone can survive.
Right.
You've got to make sure you don't rub anyone the wrong way, or he might, I'm not going to say rub you the wrong way, but he might,
erase?
Cut your, there's a lot of different ways we could put it. But let's just say I'm happy that they're both alive and well.
Yeah, he clearly Phil seemed like a real person, wasn't a actor portraying Phil, and like Phil's long dead, and we're going to discover that years from now. No, that looked like Phil Daru to me. So it was very cool, though, kind of, Eric, you're a good little matchmaker there, I got to tell you, man. Where sometimes, I said Phil reached out, you're like, okay, cool. Seth, and they hit it off. Like, actually, we kind of take a bit of a backseat in these conversations where they're just exchanging ideas back and forth. So I love to see that, man. And I love to see them united in the context of lifting in general, and then also the utility of lifting beyond just looking ridiculously good or lifting a lot of weight.
Absolutely. And this has been a marriage that's been, I would say, off and on in physical culture in the Iron Game for a long time. Some of the most prominent physical culturists like George Hackenschmidt, if you've ever heard of a hack squat, or he's actually has some really impressive records from back in the day. He was a wrestler. And just like we had the BJJ episode, now we have this Fight S&C episode. It's kind of showing that connection much more clearly of where lifting weights can be a pathway towards performance enhancement for combat athletes.
Let's just get started, boy. So I'm not saying that a company approached us, Eric, offering us not money, not even clout, but an opportunity that may have been similar to someone that rhymes with Joe Rogan, who apparently sold his podcast for a cool $100 million. And this isn't a pivot. We just so happen to have two guys qualified to talk about MMA, some S&C coaches that maybe trained a lot of top tier fighters. This is all, what do we say, Eric? A coincidence that it's all happening. We planned this episode for years.
Yes, some people would say this is a pivot. This is a way for us to jump on the gravy train, as you would say. But for me, I've got my buddy I did my PhD with and a fellow competitive bodybuilder on. So this is no change. This is still who do you know and who do you oil up and flex with on Iron culture.
Oh, yeah.
So that's my opinion.
Can I just say we're going to introduce the guest, but that's why I'm going to talk that shop a little bit because I am pumped for this episode because as I was talking a little bit off air with Eric, I got into MMA. This is one of the few, I'd say, hobbies of mine where I'm an enthusiast, have never participated, did a little Muay Thai, nothing fancy, nothing to write home about, but circa maybe 2003, when I was just, in high school, The Ultimate Fighter kind of came on. That's how I found out about Pride FC. I had a cousin that was talking about this guy, this mythical guy in the 90s to me, Hoist Gracie. He could beat anyone. He's the real life Bruce Lee, right? So all these things come together. Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner, cool, whatever. I got into Pride FC because I'm just, all about that life. And then from there, Fedor, Nogueira, Sakuraba, Wanderlei, Shogun, Rampage. Those are my boys. That's the classic era. Fun fact, I'm going to earn my brownie points here from Seth and Phil. This is what's up. Is that during quarantine, one of the activities I did, myself and my brother, is actually the UFC Fight Pass, the thing that you can order. It's like their Netflix or whatever. They have the entire library of Pride FC. I started back again, myself and my brother, from Pride 1. We're all the way to Total Elimination 2004. Nogueira just submitted Crow Cop. Legendary move. And then Wanderlei just knocked out Rampage for the first time, that Muay Thai clinch. So to say that I am excited to hear about this from SNC coaches. Oh, Eric's like, he does know some stuff. I would say probably MMA knowledge, lifting somewhere here. I don't know where, but it's like we're in this enthusiast. And I even I'll give respect to both you guys, is that I look forward to having this conversation because I've seen some from sort of our community, I say myself and Eric, like powerlifters, bodybuilders, weightlifters, strongman competitors, dabble, and they play it safe, boys, okay? They do what? They do a little BJJ. They want to roll around. They don't want to get punched in the face, you know what I'm saying? But also, they're kind of going from one direction. And so, speaking with both of you, Seth and Phil, it's going to be interesting. Phil, like you said, bodybuilding, powerlifting, to talk all about these things, both directions. So I am thrilled, and I am honored to have both of you on this show here today.
Well, thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah. So you guys don't know this because we didn't do a good job at informing you of this, but we'll have an intro that we have recorded beforehand where we're going to give you some kudos. But I like to hear it right from the horse's mouth. That's not an insult. I think horses have fantastic legs, so that's a huge compliment.
Sure.
Phil knows what I'm talking about. He's been on stage, so we'll use that as the most important part of your resume, Phil. So besides being a one-time competitive bodybuilder, what else do you have as part of your CV and your resume for this whole MMA thing that I've heard stands for something that I don't know what it stands for?
Yeah. Well, I started training in MMA I was 19 years old, so it's around 2010. So 2010, started working with American Top Team. After I got done with my college career, I played college football for Alabama State University, got my degree there in exercise science. Then after that, I was like, all right, man, I need to do something. And I was like, all right, I need to compete because I couldn't play football anymore. So I started doing that. I remember going to an individual by the name of Dean Thomas. He was training me full-time for, I want to say, roughly 4 or 5 years. And at that same time, I was helping my teammates train for fights itself, and also myself opened up my own gym at the age of 22 right next to an American Top Team affiliate school. So I was able to do all of that at the same time, still be a professional. I turned pro in MMA at 21. And fun fact there, at 21, my first pro fight was the main event, and it was against a guy that fights in the UFC now, Kurt Hollabaugh, who actually was from the same area as Dustin Poirier. So it goes full circle. And Dustin was actually at the fights when I did fight this guy. And we were the main event, believe it or not. And so it was my first time going down to 155. And I could talk a little bit about that too as well, how crazy those weight cuts were when we didn't really know what we were doing at the time. But yeah, so fast forward, I started working full-time at American Top Team. I turned 26. I retired from MMA as a competitor. I started coaching full-time. I've coached everyone from Ioane and Jacek, Dustin Poirier, Edson Barbosa. I've worked with Frankie Edgar. I currently work still with Junior Dos Santos, Dustin Poirier, Ioane still. So, I mean, I've worked with well over, I can't put a real number on it because, again, I was working at some point at American Top Team, I was working with 60 to 70 fighters at a time in camp. And they're all primarily UFC, Bellator, 1FC, and the major promotions. So now I opened up my own facility. We're here in Boca Raton, Florida. So I will still work with all of my athletes, but I also work with sport athletes too as well, like obviously football, soccer, baseball, all of that good stuff. But obviously my passion is combat sports. So I'm 31 now, and I don't feel like I'm stopping anytime soon. So we'll see. That's awesome. It in a nutshell.
That's quite the nutshell, my friend. So 2 interesting things that are going to come from that. First, my good friend Dr. Mike Zerdos, who was one of my supervisors on my PhD, is at Florida Atlantic University. And I was there for a bit doing my last PhD, so I'm well familiar with Ratmouth, Florida, Boca Raton. And my second question is to put the cherry on top of your CV. I have one question. Side chest or side tricep?
Oh, side tricep.
My man.
All day.
That's
all
what's
day.
up. Okay.
100%.
So you're again, like I said, a full-fledged member of the cult, whether you like it or not. We'll send you your member pack along with the Kool-Aid. Don't drink it yet. We'll let you know. That'll be coming through the mail. Still haven't figured out how to send Kool-Aid through the mail, especially during the pandemic, but we're working on it. It's coming. Mm-hmm. All right. My good friend Seth Lenetsky. No. Dr. Seth Lenetsky. Awesome to have you on.
PhD,
That's
Eric?
right.
Is it doctor?
PhD.
Oh, okay.
PhD.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
PhD, DDS. I'm a Reiki massage specialist. I got it all.
I love it. The Reiki
That's a
is
joke. I
my
don't
favorite.
do Reiki, no.
But he is a dentist, yes.
Yes, I'm a dentist.
Which you need for all of the punchology you study. Huh? You like that
The
transition?
technical term, yes, punchology.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in that's a joke, but it's not really. Could you tell the Iron Culture fans what is the title of your PhD?
No, I can't. I don't fucking remember it anymore.
But can you paraphrase the title?
You finish your PhD, you put that shit away, you know.
That's true. And I can mostly get mine right. So you go ahead.
Yeah. So my PhD was on assessing biomechanically punching. So I looked a lot at EMG, so what's going on with muscle activation during punching. I looked a lot at what's going on ground reaction force, so how we're developing force from the ground all the way up into our fist. And then I developed some different ways to measure punching and kind of broke down, rather than giving us one variable, different variables that we can look at for impact.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. I remember when you did your proposal and just thinking like, man, there's a whole other world depending on just moving slightly laterally in S&C to the way you train people, the science that goes into it. We're talking about double peaks in EMG. We were talking about what muscle groups contribute. Also, fun fact, I was recruited to be in one of Seth's studies. And because I took karate during my young ages, I was categorized in the trained fighters category. So so just to have my own little part of the CV, don't say anything, Seth.
You were making shit up right now.
No, I'm pretty sure I was in the trained fighters category of this study.
I seem to remember you had to have been a fighter in the last 25 years, and you were about 6 years out of that.
No, I'm only 37. So
I'm pretty sure you're 48.
All right. Nonetheless, in PubMed it says I'm a trained fighter, so therefore, Phil, I'll be contacting you soon for my MMA debut. But
Let's
Seth,
do it.
thank you, Seth. I would love to hear a little more about your. So that's your academic background has been in sports science and specifically your PhD looking at punching mechanics. What about your practical experience as a trainer in this world?
Yeah, sure. Very similar story to Phil. Started out as a fighter around 2005 with Team Quest, way back in the day. Those guys in Gresham, Oregon, out of Matt Linden's old used car lot we used to train out of. So I was lucky enough to grow up with those guys. Worked under Mike Dolce. I'm sure, Phil, you know him. So he was kind of my first big exposure. Hold on. Sorry. That's an extra one. You can keep that in for me.
Yeah, let's
yeah.
leave it.
So
We're gonna get smell-o-vision soon for this podcast. Don't worry.
Please. It's goat cheese. You'll love it. Started with Mike Dolce. Did the fighting thing just a little bit. Only had a couple of fights. Really not for me. Just, I'm a big softie, so I didn't like getting in the cage and beating people up too much. Loved the training aspect of it. Was heavily involved with that. Moved to Thailand for a bit. Did some kickboxing. And then, 2008, I got married and moved to New Zealand and decided I wanted to, really get into things and start doing the academic career. Started there. I was also working as an S&C at the time because I'd done training in the past. Was working in rugby. Moved my way over to Taekwondo as a New Zealand head S&C for Taekwondo. Worked a lot with the boxers over there, pro and amateur. Not a lot of MMA when I was over there, though. My main career has been in boxing. Did my PhD, focused purely on boxing. Now, it's punching, so there's carryover, but it's all about boxing. After that, moved to the States, worked under Lauren Landau a little bit, doing some sports science stuff out of a group called Resilience Code. Got to work with a lot of his MMA guys, and I mean, you know Lauren, talk about a legend, so it was pretty amazing working with him. Moved up to Canada after that, up here with the whole family now, Victoria, and now I'm the director high performance at Boxing BC.
Omar, I feel like we haven't had this level of qualifications in the sports we actually participate in ourselves. So this is a pretty impressive podcast. I'm impressed with us.
Oh, well, I'm always impressed by us, Eric. And some might even say aroused. This subject arouses me, And I could say that for those that don't know anything about MMA, exactly what Eric said, the caliber of what we have going on today is at the tippity top. And I think even if those aren't interested, MMA, like what, savage barbaric fighting, I'm not interested in that. I prefer to, resist gravity or whatever. Okay, cool, bro. At some point in literally I'll just speak for men here and say every man's life, because it's like, it's some sort of call to action where you're going to do a little boxing, you're going to do a little wrestling. There's going to be that thing. You're with your cousins. And then what do? The uncle set it up, so it's a fight club in the basement. We all have had this experience before. We know what's up. And the strongest emerges, and they're known as the alpha in the pack. We've all had this experience. But, much like I would say the general gym enthusiast likes to dabble at some point in some sort of strength component, powerlifting, strongman, weightlifting, I'd say most individuals, most guys at some point, they want to learn how to punch. They want to learn how to grapple a little bit. And thanks to the UFC, probably in North America, they helped catapult it to a much higher stratosphere. And that's why I'm just giving a little love to Pride FC. I do have a quick topic of conversation that is a slight tangent, but I want to hear from two other lifting enthusiasts, and I'll bring Eric along the way for this conversation, because we're deep diving. It's like we're talking about weightlifting, and we're going to deep dive all the way back to Tommy Kono. You know what I'm saying, Eric? I want theories, not or facts if you have it, because Seth actually said Team Quest, which shout out, they're pretty much one of the few, let's say, wrestling camps, Randy Couture, Dan Henderson, where they just have this positivity. Back, once again, the heyday I watched was like 2003 to 2000 and maybe 11 or 12. Took a gap, and then the last 2 years got kind of back into it. What happened, gang, with the Pride fighters entering the UFC, and how much, because I'm going to say it, because I'm not a fighter, don't worry, you don't have to say it if you don't agree, how much did Dana White screw them over? Because we all saw what happened in 2003 when he came. Some are going to say steroids, and this is where it gets interesting, Eric. So basically, for those that are unaware, Pride FC was the big Japanese organization. It was bigger than the American organization known as the UFC for a long, long time. They had the top tier fighters. They had the best heavyweight fighters, the best middleweight fighters. I listed some of them: Fedor, Nogueira, Crow Cop, Rampage, Vonderlei, Shogun. Just who's who, Eric. It's like the NFL, and then what was the thing that cropped up that was like kind of a wannabe version of the NFL? What was it called, guys? Like XFL or whatever.
XFL, yeah.
Let's be honest. The UFC was kind of the XFL to Pride's NFL. I said it. So they bought it. They ran into there's some Yakuza trouble. I'm saying, Phil, don't worry. I know you're associated so deep, so you got to tread on water. But I go all the way deep, brother. So I guess my question is that you had all these top tier fighters, and some have said steroids in Pride they weren't testing, whereas in UFC it's true they were testing. But basically, Eric, here's what happened. Here's like kind of the interesting enigma. You had all these top fighters, okay, top fighters, and when UFC fighters would come into Pride, they would lose. Now, UFC buys Pride, the big organization, big Japanese. They had some Yakuza problems. It's very interesting, honestly. They went under. Pride was bought by UFC. They took some of the fighters. So you had Vonderlei Silva now. You have Nogueira. You have Crow Cop, this guy who one kick, boom, to the head, left leg cemetery, right? All these top tier fighters entered the UFC. And so you have the best of the best. LeBron's now entering the UFC. What's going to happen, right? He's going to dominate. And yet, a lot of them, most of them, besides Rampage beat Liddell, Nogueira got the heavyweight title. Anderson Silva, sure, you could say he was a Pride fighter, but he fought in Pride a bit, backed out, and then came to be a dominant UFC fighter. I want to hear from both of you guys. Just talk that shot with me, because it's related to anabolic steroids, intrigue, just training in general. Maybe, the qualifications you guys spoke about, weight cuts of fighters, like, things getting more optimized with time. What happened where Pride fighters flopped into UFC? Anyone? I'm listening. This is the topic. Let's get juicy.
All right, Seth, go ahead first, because I got something for him.
Okay. Well, no, now I want you to go, because you guys, do you got inside baseball information here? Like, I'm talking as a fan at this point. My thought, yeah, steroids plays a role in it, but I seem to remember that was still we weren't even into really heavy testing at that point, and TRT was still allowed early on with all those Pride guys. So that's a smaller impact, I think, than a lot of people give it credit for. I mean, for a couple of things. One, you got to remember that Pride had a lot of filler, right? There's no Japanese pro wrestlers in the UFC. And you had it, and it was right as the UFC was really starting to come back, or come up. So you had a lot of killers there, a lot of good guys. No one's fighting Takayama, right?
Yeah.
So that makes it a lot easier. I mean, I could fucking take Okay, I couldn't take Takayama, but you know what I mean. Like, guy outweighs me by 70 pounds. But still, like, there was a lot of garbage there that these guys were padding their records with.
Sure.
Additionally, these guys were not older chronologically, but Pride was rough. It was a lot of like, hey, we got 3 weeks and I want you to go and fight Crow Cop. Let's do this. And like, shit, I'm going to take a beating. So these guys had miles on them. You look at Crow Cop, for example, like, he was fairly gun shy towards the end of it, right? We all remember the pushing he did. He just like, I'm just going to shove you. Why? Probably because he was just beat to shit at that point. How many concussions? Gonzaga?
Yeah, they knocked him out, man. I saw that live. Bro, broke my heart. Go on.
Yeah, right. So, like, he's not, like, fully recovered from that. He's just kind of messed up. They're all beat up and old at that point. Vanderlei, I think, had taken that huge Crow Cop knockout, too, by that point when he came in. Rampage is the youngest guy there, right? He's able to keep going. Nogueira is just impossible. He's not human. The guy has a dent in his side from getting hit by a truck. So, of course, wear and tear is not going to affect him, but it did in the end. So I think it's that these guys were just kind of worn out after a lot of rough time from Pride. I mean, the guys who weren't, like Dano, right? Henderson wasn't so worn out. He was able to keep competing because he didn't play that game nearly as much. He'd come in for his fights, but he'd stay in shape, and also, again, freak of an athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, like that's exactly what I was thinking too as well. When you're looking at it from training and perspective, like we're training year round. And a lot of the times back then, those guys were fighting inside the gym. So they were getting into wars every day. So when you go there, after all of that time, like Vanderlei Silva, that guy was a shell of himself when he got to the UFC. So at that point, you have guys that started to train smarter. You had younger kids coming up that had physical talent. They had athleticism. And then you throw on the technique and the overall game plan, and it just wasn't a match for those guys that coming out of such hard camps for so long. So yes, getting their body beat up on a constant basis in an organization like Pride, where they would soccer kick people in the head, that's a little bit different, right? So yes, I do believe that one, they were past their prime going into the UFC. Maybe, there's some exceptions there, but for the most part, a lot of new up-and-comers were getting good, and UFC and MMA in general was on the come up, whereas opposed to, back when the UFC guys would go to Pride, well, those guys were already really at that level. They were at their peak. So you're bringing in new guys that really don't know so much about the sport, and then you flip that over. Now you got guys that are over the hill trying to come back to these young guys, and it just doesn't happen that way. So I think mostly they were just beat up, just like Seth said, constant pounding. I had 8 concussions, guys. Like, with that will tear a fighter down. That's why I actually ended up retiring from the sport. And it wasn't just from fighting, it was from years of playing football, but those things accumulate. And we now know that the reason why we don't go so hard, and a lot of guys don't even spar anymore. Like Robbie Lawler does not spar, or at least he didn't for a couple of camps, because they know how to fight. Like, they know how to take a punch, they know how to give a punch. So at the end of the day, we're getting smarter with the level of training. And then from there, guys are just getting better. You got kids coming up that know MMA. They don't just start with BJJ, or they don't just start with wrestling. They actually start with MMA. So once they hit 21, 22, well, now they're fully ready to compete at the highest level. That's why you got guys going right into the UFC and being really good.
Man, it's crazy for those that are listening once again. I'll try and loop as much as possible back now to just the casual listener that's maybe, into more lifting. I'd say it's like we're talking now about MMA, and it's like talking about strongman, except we're going all the way back to Bill Kazmaier. We're going back to like the 70s here, talking about a golden era that really set the stage for things. And I think something I'd propose quickly, I also, as you guys both said, with a UFC explosion, the total talent pool, much like what we've seen in powerlifting, rose astronomically. So maybe I'm making up numbers, but maybe you had 1,000 fighters like in the world at the time. Then UFC, thanks to Spike TV and that whole Stephen Bonner, Forrest Griffin fight, it tripled, quadrupled the revenue, the viewers. As that kept happening, and every year there's that doubling, you go from 1,000 to 2,000, 4,000, 8,000. Sooner or later, much like once again powerlifting, a record that would be 6 years ago now in a drug-tested competition here in America that would allow you to go to Worlds. You're lucky if you finish top 20 inside of America. So I could see that talent pool. I do find that interesting, Phil and Seth. That's why one of my favorite boys, Boss Rudin, and I think I said this in the podcast we had Jessica on, when I said all the guests that we could have World's Strongest Man, we could have Ed Cohn. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, Ed, I love you, bro. I'm never starstruck or enthused. Like, oh, cool. Man, that's Ed Cohn. If I saw Boss Rudin or if I met Boss Rudin, I'm like, dude, I've listened to your commentary for years. You're a legendary dude. Like, this is what's up. This is what I grew up watching, you know? And fun aside, I bet $100 on Rampage because I had watched all the Pride FC. I knew he was highly underrated. The odds against him, guys, I don't know if you know this, when he fought Liddell, 5-1. So I made $500 because they previously had matched up and he whooped Chuck's ass and it's just, a mismatch. I want to hear from both of you though, because there's so much to unpack and maybe to tie to something that people can relate to. Weight optimization, right? That's a very popular topic. It's a popular topic when it comes to lifting performance. I know both of you guys being S&C, you could tie that back just to the casual listener once again. But one thing I've noticed in MMA, first, where you said Takayama, like Don Friday Takayama, is that weight optimization is real. Before Eric, what would happen is a fighter would probably be, honestly, you guys would know better. You could say the body fat, but maybe like 16%, maybe 18% if you're in the 205 class. So they're not optimized. They have some adipose tissue, right? And we're not talking in the heavy, like the super heavyweights. We're talking middleweight, heavyweight. I'm going to give a shout out to Kira Shoji. No shame against my boy. But he's like 5'7", 220, 40% body fat, Eric. Like, no joke. It's like he has no business fighting in that class. You know what I'm saying? So we've seen that when it comes to powerlifting. Guys that used to be, 230. It's like, you got to lean up a little bit, build a little bit more muscle. We've seen that also in MMA. Can you just talk to me about that process of weight optimization and define that as being the right weight to be more competitive, and that typically means being leaner and having more muscle mass. So can you just talk to me about lifting as it relates to the average MMA competitor? Don't know who wants to open up this one.
Well, for me, I'll start, Seth, because you started last time.
Go for it.
For me, I look at it in two ways, right? You have to have, one, an adequate amount of muscle on you to produce force, absorb force, everything in that nature. But then you look at a guy like Daniel Cormier, who obviously has a lot of body fat on him, right? But he's highly athletic. So I think it comes down to, can you move with the weight that you have on you? Can you still be athletic? Can you still be strong? Can you still have the conditioning to go through a 3-round fight, whatever the case may be? So for me, as long as they have the optimal mobility, the athleticism to handle that load or whatever they have as far as adipose tissue on them, then that's fine. We got to work with what they have, because sometimes, like a guy like Daniel, or even Big Country, Roy Nelson, those guys didn't have a choice. They were good at that weight class. There's no point. You could negatively affect their overall career by bringing them down and losing some weight, because now they're the stuff that made them good in that weight class, whether it be a heavyweight weight class or a light heavyweight, they're fast, they're agile. They're not going to be that fast in the 185 division. They're going to be that fast in the 170-pound division, And then you got guys on the opposite side of the spectrum that are too big for the weight class, right? And so now we have to build some more muscle on them, get them bigger. So now they can actually feel good and not have to cut so much weight and degrade their performance going down to like 145 when they walk around at 190. Right. I got a guy by the name of Mike Davis, who's a big ass 145er. He couldn't make the weight. He just physically can't. And honestly, I don't even know how Dustin made his weight at 145. The kid's bigger than me. His back is wide as shit, and his hands and everything else. So from a structural standpoint, yeah, we want to make sure that they have the adequate amount of body fat so that they can be athletic, but also still be able to move and be strong. And again, it goes back to, where are you going to be the most dominant at? In what weight class do you feel comfortable at? So that's my thought on it. And then if a guy comes to me and wants to, I'd rather them go up a weight class than go down in a weight class, because there's so many things now that you have to take into account, especially in camp. A lot of guys are only focused on the weight cut. And we're talking 4 weeks out from the fight. So now, as a physical preparation coach, I got to look at that and be like, man, I got to really monitor our outputs, our volume, our fatigue management. And I have to make sure that we're doing that with, whether they have a weight cut specialist, like a Mike Dolce or a George Lockhart or something like that. And I have to converse with the skills coaches, making sure that they're not killing them. So there's a lot that goes into it. But going back to that, I feel like whatever's going to be the best body fat for them, to where they can be athletic, but also still be dominant in that weight class.
Understood. Yeah. And Seth, just before we go on, out of curiosity, because I want to hear about that weight cut process, to give everyone maybe some context, because by the time this is out, it will have happened. Kamaru Usman, he's a big fighter. He's one of the guys. Eric, just an example. What would you boys, Seth, what do you think his body fat level is, Usman, when he's in the ring? He's 170, 5'11", but dude is jacked out of his mind. What do you think his body fat?
Yeah. I am hot garbage when it comes to that, man. I got to be honest with you, so I'm not going to say, just because I'll say whatever, 6, and you guys will go, what the fuck are you talking about? I'll say 8, and you'll go, oh, that's totally right. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't run off body fat in general, body fat percentage. I'm a skin fold guy and just sum of skin folds. But I agree with Phil so much there that, like, I don't really care too much about necessarily how much body fat they're carrying. Obviously, there's too much if you're a 145 and you got a gut or something, but it's how they can move and what they can do at that weight class. So I'm 100% with Phil on that. Depends on the athlete, depends on what they can do. One thing I will say is there's a culture of weight cutting that I think may not actually be tied to any type of performance. So just today I got a paper from Christopher Kirk. He's out of UK. I didn't get a chance to read anything but the abstract, but it was basically, I don't know if it was just UFC, it might have been just MMA in general. But he looked at a bunch of fighters doing big weight cuts and no real performance gains. These guys cutting huge amounts of weight and not doing well. So I think that we put too much of a focus on being giant and, I'll cut down to 103 pounds even though I walk around at 200 because I'm going to crush whoever's at 103 pounds. Because there's so many other things going on. Head injuries or TBI is way worse with a weight cut. You've just got poor performance. Aerobic impact is huge. So there's way too much focus, I think, just traditionally on I got to cut weight. And that comes in part just from fight sports, but also because we come from a wrestling background in the more US-based MMA, that's what we do. I mean, I remember I was, 130 pounds soaking wet in high school, and I was going to wrestle at 115 because that's what you did, right? Yeah. That probably wasn't good for me. I can assume. I'm going to blame that on why I'm 5'8", Eric. That's why I'm so short. But it's just like, it's
both
this
his
culture
parents
stuff.
are 6'5", by the way, just for the record.
Yeah.
Not true.
My dad's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. There's a lot of unanswered questions here.
Yeah, don't get into that. But yeah, so I think that there's a lot of cultural stuff going on with weight that isn't reflected all in the science, and that we need to explore a lot more before we get any kind of real answers.
Yeah.
Seth,
I think
Phil.
also, sorry about that, Eric, but I think, when it comes down to competing, and like I said, I had to cut down to 155, and I used to walk around. I got out of high school at 205, and I played college football at around 195. And I met Dean, and he told me, if you're going to be competitive, you have to go down to 155. And I'm thinking to myself, bro, I haven't been 155 since fucking middle school, So I'm like, but you got to understand, from a structural standpoint, it would be beneficial for me because I'm 5'8" too, bro. So we're good. So, but the guys at 155, you got some bigger guys. They're like 6 foot. I mean, my last fight in MMA, I fought a guy who was 6'3", right? And he had an 80-inch reach. Yeah. So it's those little factors there that fighters want. No matter what they say, they always want an upper hand. So that's why the weight cut is so drastic. But there's a guy by the name of Frankie Edgar who's dominant at only cutting, not even cutting 5 pounds, kind of just like sweating it out or not eating for like one meal. And he did his thing. The thing was, are you going to trade performance for coming in or thinking that you're going to be the stronger guy when you're really not? So and again, like I said, I had this conversation with Mike Davis yesterday because him, Brock Weaver and Mike Davis are the guys I'm working with right now. And Brock is a bigger guy too. He fights at 55. He walks around at 190. But Mike Davis is I don't want to put him out like that, but Mike Davis is a beast. He's strong as shit. He's a lot stronger right now than Brock. Brock is a good fighter, don't get me wrong, and that has nothing to do with them, you know, whatever the outcome would be if they fought, their teammates. But what I'm saying is Mike Davis is going to have a better time going to 55 as opposed to losing strength going down to 45. That makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah, man, I want to jump in there real quick. Is that all right, Eric?
Absolutely.
Okay. You know I love hearing you talk. Yeah. So I had an athlete I was working with who was 135er, kickboxing background, just amazingly fast hands and feet, getting into MMA. He goes, I'm not going to get fights at 135 in general. I got to go up to 145. And he puts on the weight, and he's got a good S&C coach, and they work it really well. And he puts on the weight, and he's looking great. He's like 150 and puts on a bunch of mass. But he's strong, he's bulky, but he doesn't move right. Right? There is, and I fucking hate to use the term functional muscle, right? But there is something to be said about your movement patterns and how you're going to actually interact with someone when you're bigger. Now, we worked with him a little bit. He cut a little bit of weight, just dropped a little bit. But more than anything, it was a psychological thing. He felt big and strong, and so he was moving big and strong, and it was screwing him up, right? The Frank Mir story is the one I think we all know. He gets his ass handed to him by Brock Lesnar, roids up and becomes giant and starts losing grappling tournaments like your local California grappling tournament because he can't move anymore, right? So I think that's another component of it, is that it goes back to the thing that Phil said initially, is it's how does the person move with their weight, and how do you best adjust that and maintain that, right? Because any change you make is going to adjust performance, so you have to be careful and you have to test stuff out too.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I just wanted to chime in for all the people who are thinking, because when they hear weight cut, they think 2-hour weight cut for the IPF. Not the same, right? And to me, for one, they have a much longer weight cut period. We're talking a day, not 2 hours. So you can do a lot more. You can put a lot more back on. And while Seth, I haven't read that latest paper that you discussed. I've had the benefit of getting exposed to a lot of the weight cutting literature and the science because of my PhD student who we had on, Kedrick. You know, yeah. And there is no weight cutting data on powerlifters, and what little exists is like people I know who've been working on these publications. So it's all based on what do MMA athletes do, what do wrestlers do, what do other weight class restricted athletes have to do in other sports. So it's a huge difference for one. And some of the research that was coming out, I think a year or two ago, was saying, hey, it's not about how much you cut, it's about how much can you put back on. And as this information becomes more readily known, it becomes like an arms race in my mind. If everyone knows I got to put more back on and I got to cut, eventually everyone's cutting because everyone's cutting, you know? And I think you know, we got to that point in the 90s in wrestling, and then we had a couple of, I think, college students die, and then they had to start putting in hydration limits and things like that. So it does concern me when I see kind of this culture, and you hear about people like you guys are talking about cutting 40 pounds to make a weight class. Do we think that's going to change? Do we think that we're going to see something tragic happen and institutionally step in and change it, or no?
For me, I like to see more weight classes, to be honest with you. I know probably Rogan talks a lot about this too, but more weight classes in MMA, just like they're doing in boxing, because my boxers don't cut as much weight, you know, and for me, you'll have better fights that way. You'll have, you know, super fights and things of that nature. And then guys won't feel as inclined to have those drastic weight cuts. So I think it's just having more opportunity or more variety of weight classes in general. That's how you're really going to stop it. I think ONE FC does a good job too as well. You know, they have the hydration protocols, and then they have to be a certain weight at a certain time, you know, and they can't be over the amount after they rehydrate or they rehydrate. So do I see that happening in the UFC? Probably not. Because I mean, it takes them a while to really let off a lot of times. You know, I mean, Dana said he wasn't going to have a female in the UFC at one point. You know what I mean? And then look at what happened with Ronda Rousey and everything else. But I don't know if it's ever going to happen in this lifetime, to be honest with you. But I do want to see more weight classes. You know, I think that'll be better for the fighters. They'll make more money. And I'm coming from, you know, like I'm coaching these guys, and they don't make enough money to be doing those weight cuts like that anyways. So it's like, in all actuality, I'd rather have more weight classes, more money for the fighters, and better fights, like in general. So, I mean, that's my thought on it. What do you think, Seth?
I think the UFC is doing some good work right now with the Performance Institute. They're getting education out there. I was working with a guy in Clint over at the Vegas PI. He's helping him maintain his weight, and there's some smart folks over there now, and so data's getting out there. I mean, I don't know what Dolce's doing these days. I don't know. Lockhart I've seen kind of more recently, and he's doing more science-based stuff, so there's some good things going on there. So there's more information in general, so I think that's going to kind of clear things up at the higher level. The concern is there going to be a tragedy at the lower level? And I mean, Z-League MMA is Z-League for a reason. I once fought a dude in a cattle yard, so shit's going to go crazy there. And yep, you did that, Phil? Yep. So, I mean, that's where things get a little more complicated. But at the higher level, I don't think it's as big a concern anymore. I think that they're starting to go, we need to treat this properly. And there's just so much information out there. It's less of an issue. Again, boxers, they have all these weight classes, but they also have a culture, right? Big weight cuts are not a culture. Now, I've done big weight cuts with boxers, and they whinge about it like nobody's business. They don't handle it like a wrestler. A wrestler, you can be like, just cut off my thumb, I can make weight, and they're down. But a boxer's going to cry in the sauna with you. But they don't cut a ton of weight in general because that's the culture they've grown up with. And I think that's what MMA is going to move towards more than anything else. Big institutional changes, maybe, who knows? I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the sport. I think it's just going to be a culture shift more than anything.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. I think so just for everyone who's kind of following the Iron culture, who appreciates the history part of our tagline, from this is purely just reading as someone who nerds out about lifting, but there's been an off and on relationship between physical culture, lifting weights, the Iron game, and fighting and the fight game over the course of history. I think a lot of people don't realize this, but some of the Iron game history greats like George Hackenschmidt were fighters. He was a world-class wrestler back in the early 1900s. And I think one of the things that happened as the lifting culture started to silo and fraction, which is kind of our mission statement here, is to start mending some of those gaps and bringing people together. Once we now had bodybuilders, we had powerlifters, we had weightlifters, all of a sudden fighters kind of got off on their own little island. And Seth, you and I have talked about this many times, how we have both at times in our career been very frustrated, and that we've tried to bring sports science and an empirical look at how to do things to our individual sport. I don't even need to bring up how like the battle against quote unquote bro science is in the fitness industry. That's there's a whole sector dedicated to that being a problem. How is that in the fight game? Because as an outsider, it certainly seems like guys like you and Phil have all of a sudden kind of come up and shown prominence, and people are starting to value the science. It seems like that culture is shifting. Am I wrong? Do I have rosy-eyed glasses on? What do you guys think?
I don't think you're wrong at all. I think when that split occurred, and my history is not as good as yours on this, so you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but when that split occurred, you saw boxing rejecting the weight room, right? Don't lift weights, you'll get slow. Now we know that's bullshit, but it became the thing. And boxing is so heavy in tradition, right? It is in many ways a traditional martial art at this point. Or at least it was. It's changing now. But it was very much a traditional martial art. You do what your master taught you. Except it wasn't master. It wasn't a guy in a gi and bowing. It was a dude who looked like the trainer from Rocky. But still, it was fundamentally the same thing.
Come on, rock!
Yeah, sorry. And chickens and whatnot. I think MMA was the big change, though. Right? MMA shows up, and these guys are like, we're inventing new shit constantly. Why don't we invent new strength and conditioning? Why don't we accept what's going on? And yeah, there's a flood of bro science that goes along with that, and things are going to change, but that's the big turning point in my mind, was MMA opening up the minds to not only looking at multiple martial arts to use, but multiple training methods, and that kind of expands what happens. And now you see boxing, and it's getting where it needs to be. It's not perfect, but it's getting where it needs to be. And you look at NSOs around the planet, taekwondo, wrestling, they've got full HP programs, and that's where it should be, and that's where it's all heading now. So I think that how much MMA was involved in that, I think up quite a bit, especially in the pros.
And just for a little bit of reference for all the listeners, NSO, National Sporting Organization, HP, High Performance. He's just speaking in that sports science lingo, but I'm the translator for you, brother.
Sorry, guys, nerding out.
Phil.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Seth when it comes to it. But I've been in world class gyms, and I've been around coaches that have that old school mentality, whatever the case that may be, quote unquote. And they still believe that doing their sport is more important, and is going to help them get stronger, get faster, get more powerful. And that's from a specificity standpoint. Obviously, yes, that's going to occur. But the one thing that they don't understand is general physical preparedness and how we can get them physically capable of doing the sport in a controlled environment. So boxing, yes, is way worse than MMA in my opinion. But I do believe, again, with Seth, that, you know, boxing is coming along. You got guys now that are coming into the sport that actually have a background in sports science, and they actually know the sport too as well. That's the great thing about, you know, myself, and even with Seth. Seth's trained before at a great gym. You know, I was a fighter for a long time, but I also have the science background. So there is a baseline of knowledge there. And then you throw in the practicality of it. That's going to help more buy-in for the coaches to let their fighter come train and do strength and conditioning, as long as it coincides with what they're doing on the mat or in the ring or whatever the case may be.
Totally makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's it. I do appreciate how kind of the internet has allowed information to move faster, and it does make sense that there's an inherent openness to MMA in that it's taking from other combat disciplines to make something new. So it seems like culturally from the start, it's like, yeah, sports science, we'll bring that in too. So it's cool to see it change. I know just from the time when Seth and I were doing our PhDs together in 2012, 13, 14, it seems like it's advanced a lot. And I think that's really cool to see. So, Seth, I'd like to get your academic perspective now, if you don't mind. Like you said, and like you joked in your proposal, there's pretty much no one else who was studying, punching mechanics, or at least not to any kind of sophisticated degree like you were trying to do. Has that changed? And where is academics in the fight game at this stage? Is there a significant research community?
Significant? No. A hell of a lot more than there was when I started, yeah. So, I mean, we're still talking, like, I can name most of the guys, right?
Yep.
I mean, you got Lachlan James, whose PhD was heavily focused on MMA and produced some incredible research. You got Kirk in England. You've got the boxing science guys, Ruddick, and I forget Wilson, I think is his name. So you got some legit guys
Wilson.
now. Yeah, Danny Wilson, yeah. They're doing some legit stuff now. So there's some serious guys. The Brazilians are always onto it. We got Lortuco, who does a lot of work with Mike at the school. He's done some great stuff. So there's some solid dudes out there, but I can name most of them. Right. And usually if you're in a field where there's a lot of stuff going on, you can't name everyone. You're just citing papers, right?
Yeah.
I can't do that in sprinting, but I can do that in combat sports. And I think that's the other big thing is it's combat sports. It's not just boxing, or it's not just MMA. We're looking at a lot of stuff. I'm doing a review right now on kicking. How do we do strength conditioning for kicking? There is very little stuff out there in kicking. Like boxing has a lot of stuff. We have a tenuous grasp on how to get someone better at punching. Nobody knows how to do anything on kicking, let alone let's get into something like clinch. Mm-hmm. There's no science on the clinch. Nobody knows how to optimize that and train for that. I mean, we've got ideas and most of it makes sense, but there's no concepts on that. Or how do we improve wrestling? There's very little on that. There's a lot of like physiological profiling, biomechanics of wrestling, which is hard. I tried to do a study on how to do a double leg once, and it was a disaster because they're banging into each other and markers are flying everywhere, and it was a huge mess. But how do you do this stuff? And it's just not there yet. So I'd say it's a lot better than it was, but it's still really in its infancy.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Did you say, sorry, Seth, real quick, there's no one that has studied the clinch at all, like the science or the...
No one that I've ever found. I mean, there might be some stuff out there.
Yeah.
Like there's these Thai researchers and they're way into combat sports, but you don't see any of their research, right? Because it's all in Thai.
Sure.
So it's not published in... So I don't speak Thai.
Well, I was just going to say, are you sure you haven't asked Rich Franklin? Because, I mean, he was the recipient of some, dangerous Muay Thai clinches from Anderson Silva. So I'm sure if anyone can report on what it feels like to get your nose smashed in by clinch, at least anecdotal, we could work our way up the evidence hierarchy as we've been talking about before,
Personal communication. That's where you'd start. Yeah.
It felt terrible. I ended my career.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to pass a lot of university ethics boards letting people get kneed in the face and then reporting back on it, but you never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so there's not a lot on it, and like that's what we have is we have footage of Rich Franklin going, "Oh shit, that hurts."
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Phil, I got a question for you. So you played college ball. You were a football player.
Yeah.
That is probably, I would say, one of the most happy marriages between S&C and a sport. NFL, powerlifting, there's huge crossover. We've seen in the World's Strongest Man, we've seen people who were centers and who played in NFL compete there. There is S&C coaches who have risen to a high level of prominence for football. Mm-hmm. So coming from a background where S&C is just a given, we are lifting weights. Yeah. We're doing power cleans, we're doing squats, we're doing bench press. We're for some reason doing 225 for as many reps as possible, but nonetheless, we are bench pressing. How was that for you? How much did that experience as a football player influence you when you came into being an S&C for fighters?
I mean, I want to say a lot, but I really can't, because when I started fighting, I was highly anaerobic, and it's an alactic sport, so with fighting and MMA in general, it's a multi-bioenergetic demand sport. So with me, I would always be like, I'd be really good and I would explode, and then I would relax, and that would cause my opponents or my sparring partners, especially Dean Thomas, to just lay it on me when I was trying to relax. So there's similarities there. Obviously, explosive power, absolute strength, some alactic capacity style training too as well. That's what we do more so, getting closer to the fight because we're trying to manage fatigue and everything that nature. But for the most part, it was a good way to understand force production and also a little bit of periodization here and there. But again, it's so different when you have a season. When they're going to compete. Whereas a fighter, they're year round. You don't know when a person's going to fight. Even the guys at the highest level for me, we didn't know Dustin was going to fight his last fight. We didn't know he was going to fight Dan Hooker until like 4 or 5 weeks prior to the fight. So even at the highest level, they always got to be ready. So that's the main issue that you have there. And that's why I decided to go with more of a conjugate concurrent style of an approach, because of the fact that we just don't know when they're going to fight. So with football, there's a little bit more of an opportunity to do more, either whatever, linear progression, block style, whatever the case. What I can say is that, learning different movements under load and being able to produce force rapidly, that's one thing I could take from it. But everything else, it was more kind of figuring it out as I go along and understanding the energy systems that go along with the sport. And I think Joel Jamison's book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning, I actually have it with me right here. It's probably one of the best books out there for energy system training, in my opinion. And that just could be for anybody, really, any sport, but it's definitely a good book. But that's really where I started to hone in on the importances of MMA and what we bring to the table as far as physical preparation specialists.
I love it. And I think this is where there's always themes in iron culture, because in the end, what works. We've had a number of some of the best powerlifting coaches on, and some of the greatest minds in modern periodization theory, and they basically said the same thing you said. She's like, yeah, there's all these periodization styles and theories, but in the end, here's how often I got to compete. I need to know when I'm going to compete to use half of the damn theories that exist. So whatever I use, it needs to emerge from the realities of the sport. So I think that's a really interesting thing. When you see, and no shade on any specific researcher, but when you see researchers who had a background as Olympic weightlifters, where they've got 3 known competitions that are in the same month on an annual basis, they're going to do a national qualifier, nationals, and they're going to see if they get to do the internationals, depending on how that goes. Yeah, you can have a 24-week block of linear periodized, DUP within the week, more specific as you go along. But when you've got at the drop of a hat at any point say, yep, 4 weeks until I do this competition, it's a whole other ball game, or fist game. But the point is, I think periodization should always be something that has that inherent flexibility, that is sports specific, and it just goes to show. Like, I think sometimes in academia we are quite disconnected from the reality, but it sounds like that's not something that is going on right now, at least for you two gentlemen. You understand how to merge the practical realities with the book knowledge. So, yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm very curious because I'm sure Eric can attest to this. Us being in, the iron game in the gym, I'm sure every guy thinks. Here's what they think. They won't vocalize it, but Phil, Seth, I'm sure you've seen this, you've witnessed this, that someone starts lifting a little bit. They gain a little bit more muscle. Oh man, I'm a badass. Like you don't want to mess with this, okay? Like wait, like full stop. I added 50 pounds on my bench press. Suddenly, I'm a better fighter. I've never been in a fight, but I just know that I'm a better fighter. And there is this disconnect, and that's why if you gents are willing, I want to get into a little bit more the nitty gritty of how to use training or S&C essentially to optimize a fighter, or what it looks like in a practical sense, because we're now seeing once again the emergence in our little space of some powerlifters, some beat up powerlifters starting to do BJJ, but that's like not the same thing as someone that wants to be a fighter, wants to be a competitive MMA fighter. Many men angry. They want to compete in their sport. They want to punch. They want to win. They want to grapple, all those things. And they need to weightlift to complement that. So that's a different conversation than someone that's recreational, used to do strength lifting, now getting in BJJ. So for all the bros out there, they're listening once again. It's like, hey man, I put 50 pounds on my bench press. I'm pretty sure I could punch hard. The answer is 1, no, you can't. 2, talk us through, and let's start with Seth, and then I'll go to Phil. Just how do you incorporate then the weight room into complementing an MMA fighter? Like, how does it actually look like? If someone's listening, thought like, I thought about it a little bit, and someone now their ego's real hurt. I can't wait to see that 1-star review of someone like, I'll have I put on 100 pounds on my bench press, and I know I could be like, throw me in a ring with one of those skinny guys. I'm sure I'll whoop that ass. So Seth, let's start with you, my man.
First off, let's go full nerd. There's a rough about 0.5 R correlation between bench press and punching force. So you may actually punch stronger, right? So you can't lose that, right? I can cite that literature. Secondly, so for me, it's a tricky one because the way I approach it is not cookie cutter. I look at every athlete and what they do and what they want to do. So if I've got a guy who's a power lifter and he's just getting into BJJ, I'm going to say, just do BJJ for a while and learn what your game is and learn what you're going to do. And then we can talk about strength conditioning. Yeah, you're going to lose some strength and okay, here's a maintenance program, but let's learn what you're going to do. And I think that's my take is I want to complement what someone does in the ring. So if it's MMA, what kind of MMA fighter are you? Are you Israel? Are you wiry and fast and you got to be coming in and out? Well, then I want you live in that velocity area, right? Maybe we'll add some strength when we know there's not going to be a fight for 6 months or whatever, 3 months. But otherwise, I want to feed the beast and I want your velocity to be the focus of what we're doing. If I got someone, and I'm going to go old school here for you, if I got a Randy Couture, I want a lot of force, right? Yeah. He's going to pin someone up against the side of the cage and he's going to control them. I want a force-dominant fighter at that point, and I'm going to train him very differently and kind of focus on that. So for me, it depends on what type of fighter they are, and if you got someone who's new to the game, figure out what type of fighter you are before you start really going, okay, here is your MMA S&C, because it can look like a million different things, and it should really vary depending on what they are. I mean, if you got a quick guy who's bouncing around on his feet, that changes even like the plyos you may choose to use, right? You want a fast SSC versus a slow SSC, right? I'm kind of a plotter, right? I just march forward and get punched in the head until I can get a hold of someone and clinch. That was my whole game, right? And that's why I was not a good fighter. But a guy like that, I should have been focusing heavily on force. But and I maybe some counter movement jumps to get explosive and some power cleans, right?
Yeah.
If you're fast and you're jumping around, depth jumps and some snatch and some lighter stuff, some one-arm snatch, that's suddenly where it makes sense for you to be. So I think it's kind of base it off the fighter, less so off of the program. If that answers your question, I think I just might have ranted for way too long.
Right before I go to Phil, right before I go to Phil, you would say, to give a contemporary example, UFC 251 happening. We got 145, Alexander Volkanovski against Max Holloway. Alex is a guy, he's 5'7", he's 145, he's a stocky guy, used to play rugby. Would you both agree? Versus Max Holloway, Bless Express, shout out. He's like 6 feet, 145, lankier, clearly not as strong. Would you both agree your training strategies, your S&C strategies would be different for those two athletes? Is that what you're saying, Seth?
Yeah, very much so. And also it'd be game plan too. Maybe we're going to change it up and it's like, you know what, Max, I want you in tie clinch all the time.
Yeah.
I'm going to change up what we're doing then, right? Maybe we don't need to work on that velocity nearly as much, and we're going to train a whole lot of focus on tying him up, and you need more upper body strength now. So I think that game plan plays a lot of it, and that's where Phil was touching on this. Being an S&C for combat sports demands a lot more communication with coaches.
Right.
If you're a wide receiver, you're a wide receiver. You're not going to train two wide receivers massively different, right? The basic fundamental attributes they need are the same. But two fighters, even between two different bouts, right? I mean, just look at Cormier, right? Like, incredible wrestler, but now he's using Eddie Hearn's cross guard and jabbing. Like, that changes his demands right there. And that's in the same guy over a couple of years.
Yeah. Phil, I'd love to hear your thoughts, man.
You know, it's funny because, like, I hope you guys weren't, like, getting me and Seth on to, like, dispute each other because, like, I'm agreeing with a lot of the things he said. So it's funny, but, yeah, like, in the beginning when we start a fight camp, or let's go back and if they don't even have a fight lined up, when I start with an athlete, I'm looking at, you know, everything, their situations, their circumstances of where they're at in their career, where they're at as far as chronological age, their training age, things of that nature. And then I'm also getting with them on a schedule so I know exactly what they're doing and when they're doing it, and that's going to help me with fatigue management. And for me, like, I like to work off, I would say acute chronic workload in a sense, and I would work off RPEs based off of how hard that training session would be. And for me, obviously, I work on a conjugate schedule or like method, you would say, but it's condensed because, again, we don't have a whole lot of time with them inside the weight room. We only really have primarily like 2 days, especially inside of camp. So I had to condense that, but, you know, when we started off, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to get a full assessment on them. Also want to get not only a physical or a physiological assessment, but also want to get a mental assessment, a personality test. So I actually use a Braverman's test to actually measure out, okay, well, who am I working with? What type of individual are you? And you get that too from communication. But like I like to just have it just to see where they dominant. Are they dopamine dominant? Are they acetylcholine dominant? For the most part, from the fighters that I work with, they're either dopamine or acetylcholine dominant. And as a matter of fact, a lot of my baseball guys are GABA dominant. So that makes a lot of sense because of who they are and what they do, you know. But again, going back to that, it kind of gives me an idea of who they are and how I can train them, how I can coach them, and what they like. A lot of guys like variation. A lot of guys don't like a lot of variation. So I'm taking that into account, keeping it in inventory. Then I'll go ahead and I'll assess them, see where they're at, see where, whatever asymmetries, bilateral deficits, dysfunctions that they have, right? From there, I'm looking at it, okay, so what exercises can I cross out and what exercise can I use? Because I'm not going to load dysfunction first and foremost. And we want to make sure that they have the optimal mobility. We want to make sure they have the optimal stability. And then we can add on to the strength there. So first and foremost, that's what I want to do. I want to develop general physical preparedness. I want to develop a general strength base if they don't have it. Because a lot of my guys, and Seth, you probably noticed too, is that those guys don't have a large time in the weight room. Like their experiences in the weight room are not there. Some of these guys are novice to beginner, novice, maybe intermediate at best, and then you got some outliers. I got Walt Harris that, played college basketball and can jump on a 61-inch box and he's 260 pounds. But that's an outlier. Will Brooks, another one. Will Brooks played college football, played or wrestled in high school, and he knows the weight room. Very good athlete. Now I can have fun. I can start to do some things. But for the most part, we're doing basic movement patterns because, again, they have to develop that structure. And if we don't do that, we start to, put some crazy shit together or some circuits that are highly lactic and they don't have the efficiency yet to even do the movement. Well, that's an issue. So we want to make sure it's very simple for them to do. And that's why I like to do sled drags and things of that nature because that's just going to give us the adaptation we want, but it's not going to put them in a bad position. We're going to get the most advantageous position possible to get the stimulus adaptation, right? So going back to that now, let's say, for instance, you go 8 weeks out, and that's usually when we start a fight camp. So now I'm looking at, outside of camp, we want to work on weaknesses. We want to plug in gaps. So if an individual needs more strength, that's what we're going to work on, right? If they need more balance, they need more mobility, that's what we're going to work on. When we get 8 weeks out, now we really don't have that luxury to really focus in on a lot of the weaknesses. Now, don't get me wrong, we want to maintain that when we get in there. So what I'm going to be working at, what I'm going to be looking for is, okay, first and foremost, like Seth said, I'm going to look at their game plan. I'm going to look at their opponent's game plan. I'm going to look at, their strengths and weaknesses from an MMA standpoint. the same thing happened like we talked about when Dustin fought Max. It was completely different than we were getting ready for Khabib. You know what I mean?
Right.
So with that being said, all the things that he was doing inside the skills training, we didn't want to overload that too much because he was doing a large amount of grappling to get ready for Khabib. So he would come into the weight room and he would be dead tired. So there's a lot of lactic capacity training going on right then and there. So what I had to do was backtrack that, do some things that he wasn't doing that can still get him ready for the fight itself. So a lot of alactic capacity type training where we were reproducing energy, right? And then we want to get into some isometric tension just so that we knew, because we were going to get in a clinch anyways. So we need to work that in a controlled environment, you know, and getting closer to the fight, obviously you taper and then you go from there. But, you know, all actuality, yes, what Seth said, we want to look at, you want to look at their strengths and weaknesses. You want to look at their game plan. You want to look at how long they've been in the weight room and how much experience they have. And then you want to make sure that you're communicating with the skills coaches so that the schedule is on point so you could manage fatigue.
Yeah, I want to jump in there real quick. Totally right on, Phil. Like you gotta know their training background as important as anything else. And I think that's something I glossed over there. If someone doesn't know the weight room, none of this shit matters. Just put a barbell on their back, let them squat it out for a couple of months, and just get used to that. And then you can kind of build from there. So I think that's very true. I don't want anyone thinking it's only specificity all the time. If they're coming in, you got to take training age into account for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Dave, one thing I'll say just to kind of circle this back to a conversation we had on Iron Culture a long time ago on the changing face of CrossFit. We had James Fitzgerald on, the first World's Fittest Man, the inaugural World's Fittest Man, who's now, you know, head of OPEX Fitness and does a lot of S&C work for CrossFit. One of the things he said is, hey, like, people misuse specificity, which is ironic in the world of CrossFit where it's supposed to be, you know, constantly varied. But he was like, you know, people will come in and just start doing WODs with no strength base. And they're quote unquote specific, but they don't have a baseline level of force production to even maintain the right movement patterns or even be able to have a reason for that volume. You know, so I think that's something that a lot of people miss, is that specificity is not a monolith. It's not something that you apply to the same class of athlete across, you know, all like no matter what. It's like, oh, if I see a boxer walk into the gym, this is what he or she should be doing. No, it very much depends on where they come from. And in a sport that is not super married up with sports science already, it sounds like you're going to get a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. And before things start to look a little more homogenized, you do have to get them to some kind of baseline level of general physical preparedness, like Phil said. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think any S&C coach who doesn't understand that is missing their core competency, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now, there's two things I want to say. The first, and I'm going to throw my boy Eric into the ring right now, and I mean that literally. So we are speaking now about professional fighters and how they're training, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that S&C. But I want to do something a little novel right now, and that is a lot of people are listening. They have never done any fighting whatsoever, but they've been part of the iron game for quite some time. So my man Eric, okay, he's standing 6 feet tall. He's probably right now, Eric, we 215, we 210, 205. What are we weighing in right now?
206.
He is 206. He is just stacked and ready to rock. He is a beautiful hunk of a man. I want to say that obviously we have Eddie Hall and Half Thor. They're doing honor to their sport of strongman by deciding to compete in boxing together. Hopefully no one dies in that ring and has a heart attack. But let's assume. So let's take it a lifting enthusiast, right? Someone that
assume they die.
You know, we can't see into the future. Assume both of them just no one dies due to a knockout, but there will be some heart failure. So let's take someone like Eric now, who has been lifting for over a decade in fantastic shape. I mean, he just looks great. Model proportions, 6 feet, like I said, 205. So if you want to have him cut, you can. But let's say Eric is a strong lad as well. If you're to take someone who is a lifting enthusiast and now they want to do MMA, how does their training change? So I just gave you a stat of a very real person. I am his pimp. I mean his handler. I'll be his manager. Walk us through what this would look like for anyone listening right now that maybe might have their interest peaked. And I don't know who wants to start with this, but someone that's been lifting for a while, so they're strong. But how are we going to transfer that over now to MMA?
Well, you want me to go, Seth?
Yeah, go for it.
So like we first, I have to get inventory on what was his training like beforehand, right? So I'm first going to look at, okay, I know Eric does a lot of bodybuilding, so he does a lot of hypertrophy training. He works in slower eccentrics and that nature. So yes, we know he has a baseline of strength in hypertrophy. Now I'm looking at it from the other side of the force velocity curve. Now I'm trying to get more velocity in those movement patterns, maybe increase his mobility a little bit too as well. Just because, again, if you're working those single joint movements and you're not getting global movement patterns down, we want to work on your overall athleticism. We want to work on your mobility. We want to work on, I hate the word functional, but you know what I mean, functionality of training, right? And from there, I'm going to look at, again, his ability to produce force and reproduce force, right? Absorb and reproduce force. Whether that be looking at a counter movement jump, a non-counter movement jump, looking at the amortization phase of where he's at. And that could be as simple as just a simple drop, a box drop jump or something of that nature. If you have, whatever force plates or anything there that you want to utilize, you could do that. But at the end of the day, I'm just looking at how well he can hit the ground and reproduce force, right? A lot of the guys, believe it or not,
The answer,
with
by the
MMA,
way, is poorly. In fact, I remember at the peak of my powerlifting career, I had a higher squat jump than I did a counter movement jump. It was about 1 centimeter higher of me just sitting into a squat and then jumping than actually maybe, I don't know, using a stretch shortening cycle. I don't do that. So
Who needs it?
no, fuck it. Hey, listen, I don't have an ACL, so that's all my life right now. So that's my life right now. No, you know what's so funny is that, like, with a lot of my fighters, especially wrestlers, and this makes sense, they're able to produce force fast. Again, there's no real great amortization phase in their abilities to move. They are static, overcome by dynamic all the time, right? Now, again, with my Muay Thai guys, they're able to do that. They're a little bit more bouncy. I would say the boxers a little bit more bouncy, right? Because they're always on their toes, they're always moving. The jiu-jitsu guys are just terrible in that nature. You know what I'm saying? But so I'm looking at it from that angle, and that would be the thing that I would be focusing on to get him to where he needs to be to get in the cage. And then on top of that is we got to get the conditioning down. You're putting yourself in lactic states already by the training that you're doing. I would look at it more from an aerobic standpoint. I would probably increase a little bit more aerobic capacity, a little bit aerobic power, and then from there, maybe doing some alactic capacity, getting closer to the fight so you could reproduce energy for a long duration.
Seth.
Yeah. Again, dude, I think we got to talk offline sometime. We're selling the same shit. I'd say right off the bat, though, first thing is if this is Eric, I'd put on my coach's hat, not necessarily my S&C hat, and say, let's go to the weight room occasionally just to keep you interested, but you're not touching a fucking weight. Just do jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and MMA for the next 6 months, and let's talk. I mean, I go back there. But again, aerobic training, from a guy who once defined his aerobic training as I do supersets sometimes, he probably needs to do some serious aerobic training. I know you've got a shitty neck and shitty hips, so how do we take care of that and keep those things from falling apart?
Hey, post-surgery, my hips are... I'm squatting like a 29-year-old again. I'm good, bro. Yeah.
Wow, that was like 30 years ago for you. Impressive, dude.
See, that's a good... Matt Brick's a good surgeon. Yeah.
Okay, so no, I mean, but like that's the things I want to know, right? Like what's going on there, and that would be my main focus from someone who's coming from another sport. What do you already got? Like, I know he's as advanced as you can get in the weight room, just about. So let's focus on his big weak points right away. And then whatever, 3-6 months down the line, once we have an actual MMA athlete, now let's target and do what we need to. And again, everything else, I think we'd have to, again, now we have a fighter. Is he bouncy fighter? Well, then we need to make him bouncier. Is he not? Then let's make him stronger. Is he a bouncy fighter and he's piss weak? Well, we know it's not going to be the case with Eric, but if he was, we need to make him a little stronger. And just kind of work off of that.
Yeah, I'm sensing, Seth, that Eric would probably be more of an opportunist fighter, more like a Kazushi Sakuraba, where he's a high IQ fighter waiting for the perfect time to put a Kimura. You should know this too, by the way, Seth, real quick, that my man's been doing weightlifting, and he's doing weightlifting this year, so he's already getting primed for this competition. You see what I'm saying?
I'm just imagining him with drawn-on muscles and wearing a diaper, talking about Kazushi Sakuraba.
He's my hero, bro. Sakuraba will always be known as the Gracie Killer and change my mind. He's one of my favorites. He brought some flair to that thing. You know what I'm saying?
The man, was an icon.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
an icon.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. 39's the best. And but like I think that kind of going off of that, right? Kazushi Sakuraba, talk about someone who doesn't fit a fucking mold.
Yeah.
I mean, he's smoking cigarettes and drinking sake and then going to fight the next day. And how do you train that, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? And I think
You
that
know-
a big part of that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, Seth, like that's one of the biggest problems with coaches. Like they'll go back to that. They'll be like, well, Sakuraba did this, or look at these guys over here drinking and partying and not doing any type of strength and conditioning, and they were killing guys. And I'm like, yeah, but that was back then. That wasn't now. You know what I mean? Like now, even with like football and things of that nature, like guys are like, man, we didn't do anything. We just did push-ups and jumping jacks, and we were good. I'm like, man, that shit don't work no more. Like it is what it is. But yeah, it's crazy. It's my bad, bro.
I knew a fighter back in the day at Team Quest, and he was quite the drinker and quite the partier, but he would walk out there and just knock guys out. And you may know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to use names. He did S&C, but he was also just partied harder than anyone I've ever known really in my life.
Yeah.
5 years down the line, that shit's falling off the wheel. Like he's falling apart, man. And there's not a career left. So I think we have to keep that in mind too, is the longevity of our athletes. And yeah, that stuff used to work, but Kazushi Sakuraba is messed up. Boss Rutan has to walk backwards down his driveway because his knees don't work anymore.
Yeah.
Like these guys are crippled.
El Guapo, that means the handsome one, as he's known as. Come on, Seth, you know what I'm saying.
So I hate to drop names like this, but I'm totally dropping names.
Drop it.
So Boss used to come into Team Quest quite a bit.
Yep.
And I'm 20 and I'm a huge fanboy. I got him to do my voicemail on my phone.
Yeah.
And then my 75-year-old Jewish grandmother calls up and gets El Guapo giving a speech on it. And she's like, is this Seth? I'm a little confused.
Oh, my God.
That dude was insane. I once saw him and Henderson spar. I'm sitting I'm behind the front desk because I worked front desk there between training, and I hear this whack, and sliding across the mats is Henderson, and he hits the wall. He gets up and he runs across. I'm like, wow, they're really going hard in there today. About 10 minutes later, whack, Boss Rutan head first into the wall, gets up, shrugs it off, runs back out there to start fighting again. The battles those guys used to have in the gym back in the day, like Phil was saying, were just hellacious.
Gents, I am all the way in. Like I said, if I met Boss, I'd be like, you are the man. Name anyone in lifting. I've met so many people, and that's what's like, man, you got to meet this person. I'm like, yeah, they're whatever. Like it really doesn't matter to me. I want now the opportunity, however, for everyone to connect it. Go ahead, Eric. What are you gonna say?
I just feel like I need to apologize to the Iron culture because you've been like, Ed Cohn, anybody in the Iron game, Like, I don't know if we're going to edit this out. I don't know if we're going to need to make an official apology
This is going to be a new apology. Yeah.
Probably the latter. Yeah. But anyway, just go ahead. Just know that I am standing here in judgment.
Hey,
An extreme.
you guys are gonna change it. You're gonna change it. You're gonna change it to the fight culture.
That's right.
Well, yeah. Well, I was gonna say, Phil, it's funny when you said, I think it was Seth actually that said, we want longevity now of a fighter. Dana White said, fighting is an opportunity, not a career. And I was like, that's a real capitalist way of saying it. Like, I'm gonna pay these people, I'm not gonna pay these people. Like, what's gonna go on here? Let me have you guys use this opportunity now to kind of extol the virtues of an S&C coach, because we've all agreed over the last 20 years, weight optimization is real, right? Guys are entering the octagon, guys and gals, leaner, more muscle. It's a much more competitive world. There's a lot more people taking those things seriously versus 20 years ago. And we can say objectively that versus no S&C, like versus no weight room, none of that, that on average for a lifter, it has improved things. My question for you guys, it's hard to quantify it. It's a case-by-case basis, depends upon the fighter. But I guess I would ask, and I'll start with Phil, what is the benefit for a fighter of entering the weight room, S&C, all these things? So someone that, maybe once again, kind of Seth style, this guy, man, I just smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, party, and I knock out fools. Like, what is the benefit? What's the true benefit? Promote your own careers now at this point. Let's hear it.
I talk about this all the time, man, because we do have to do this a lot, especially with the skills coaches. But, when you got two guys with equal amount of skill and talent, the one guy that's going to have that upper hand or have that X factor is going to be the guy that is stronger, more powerful, has better conditioning. And the way we can do that is through the weight room or is through the physical preparation that we're doing with these individuals. Because of the fact that they're in the training, yes, they're going to get specificity of the sport, doing their skills training. And don't get me wrong, doing sparring and grappling and rolling, you're going to get a lot of conditioning out of that. But again, I know a lot of guys that are at the highest level that are really good at that. So it's not as intense, especially when they don't have training partners that can keep up with them. So at that point, I got to get them in a controlled environment and put them on a prowler, and then we'll see how good their conditioning really lasts. But they do know that is going to help them because it's giving them something that they haven't had. And again, we're increasing that adaptation due to the fact that they've just never done it. And then once they get into, their skills training, now it's a lot easier, or it's a lot easier to cope with the stresses put upon them.
Seth.
Well said. For me, first point would probably be injury mitigation. I tend not to use the injury prevention phrase anymore, just because if they get hurt, then it's on you. So it's injury mitigation is the term we're trying to use now, right?
Not to mention the point of the sport is to injure other people. It's just not realistic, right?
yeah, right. There's that too. So I did a little bit of work with some guys from the USC, and they threw around this quote, this study, and I'm gonna misquote it, I think, but it was like folks who attended 85% of their training sessions were twice as likely to get a medal versus those who didn't. Now again, I'm getting that wrong, but the fundamentals is still there, right? If we can keep athletes training, they're more likely to win. So that's number one for me is injury mitigation, right? And like Phil said earlier, I want to check out and see, where are my danger areas? Where do I want to work on someone? I mean, most fighters, most boxers, feet first, right? They're going to have bad feet, they're going to have bad shoulders. Let's work on those areas and build from there. So that's number one. Number two is conditioning. Like Phil said, again, you keep stealing my bits, dude. Conditioning is huge, right? So think of like the great fights. The Thrilla in Manila. That was a conditioning battle, right? It's 1,000,000 degrees out there, and Ali's able to maintain the pressure. And now I'm blanking on the Thrilla in Manila. Who's he fighting?
Frazier.
No.
Yes, he's fighting, and Frazier wasn't, right? So that's a conditioning battle. Go to MMA. Go with one of the classics. Tito Ortiz versus Frank Shamrock. Tito burns out. Frank doesn't. He wins the fight. Conditioning is so incredibly important. And then third is, you can punch harder, and I think that's important. You can kick harder. You're going to be stronger in the clinch. Those are all very important things. But I kind of would rank it as that. And if you just get injury mitigation from seeing an S&C, you're going to be a way better fighter. If you just get conditioning and injury mitigation, you're going to be an incredible fighter. Mm-hmm. You get all three, and now you're on your way to being something special as long as you actually know how to punch and kick.
Whew. Yep. Eric.
I mean, it's just really cool to speak to two individuals who have a very nuanced perspective, but can also put it into well-articulated points. I think anyone who's watching can tell that you guys have been in the game. And I think it is always cool as a specialist in one area to then listen to a specialist in another area and to see some of those similarities and how much certain things depend. Certain truths are kind of self-evident across disciplines. I'm just very much appreciate you guys coming on here spitting fire. So, yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Hey, I won't be as generous as Eric. What I will say is I'm going to judge you exclusively on your predictions for Saturday's fight. So we're just going to go over the three. Then I'm going to message you both on Monday after. And everyone, once again, you could judge everything they said in context of whether or not they're right in predicting who would win. So boys, let's just go down them first. I'm going to first go Phil, then Seth, and then I'll reverse it for each fight. Out of curiosity, Phil, let's start with the title fight, the main card. Masvidal, Street Jesus versus Kamaru Usman. Who are we picking in that one? That's fight one. Let's go.
Man, I'm going to probably catch some heat for this one, but...
Moss?
No.
Oh, Usman's the wrestler, bro. Like, how is he not the safe choice?
No. So, listen. I know both of them very well. Yep. I know Usman, they're both from my area, right?
Yeah.
Masvidal, he's a part of American Top Team. Usman, one of my closest friends in the game, Corey Peacock, Dr. Corey Peacock, trains Usman. And I know that Usman has tremendous talent. And he's super hungry. Even though he won the title, he has still a chip on his shoulder. Masvidal is a hell of a fighter. honestly one of the real fighters in the game. But I don't see him being able to stop Usman from taking him down. And even though Masvidal has really underrated wrestling game, Usman's just on another level. Physically, mentally, I feel like he's gonna get it done. I feel like I don't know if he'll get the finish, but I do know that he'll control the fight for the entire 5 rounds. So I give it to Usman.
Yeah, Seth.
What he said, I give it to Usman. Just to talk differently, don't fuck with the Jesus. He could knock someone out at any time. I mean, there's a flying knee coming your way, so it could go either way. But I think Usman's pretty tough to beat for just about anyone on the planet right now.
Yeah. No, Masvidal street G's. I love Masvidal. I love his personality. I think I'm glad he's getting paid. Usman as a fighter, I love Usman as a fighter. He showed against Covington that he can take a lot of knocks to the face. So, like, his chin is better than people expect. So, I think good calls, boys. Let's go just 2 more. Let's go down now. The Alexander the Great, Volkanovski versus Max Bless Express Holloway. Let's start with Seth, actually, on this one. Then we'll go to Phil.
This is tough, right? Because, I mean, you got a guy who's Kiwi, and so coming from New Zealand, I should support him. But I just love me some Max, man. I don't even know if I really have a great statement as far as who's technically going to win it or anything like that. I just really want Max to win it. He's just a fucking awesome dude and deserves to have awesome things in his life. So go Max. So watch, he's going to come out on Twitter and say something horrible, or then now it's going to look bad.
Yeah, man. Max is a good guy, man. I like Max as a person. And as a fighter too as well. He just comes to fight. Volkanovski's a fucking killer, man. Super wiry, has that 1-punch knockout power. It's gonna be very hard to count him out of this fight. But I think Max has, again, something to prove. And a guy that has been dethroned in a sense can come back with a little bit more fire now. So he's gonna rise, and we'll see him get this. I don't think he'll get the finish, but I think he'll put on a hell of a show, and he'll edge him out as far as, I mean, I want to see a finish, but I think he'll edge him out as far as punches landed and just overall dominance in the fight.
Bounce predictions.
Yeah,
go ahead,
one other
Seth.
thing about Max, though, there's rumors that his training camp has been non-existent for this fight.
Really?
Right? He's doing Zoom sessions, so there's all these rumors floating around. He doesn't have anything, and that's obviously a huge knock against him because he obviously trains really hard and comes from good camps. I don't know how true it is, and again, you never know in the fight game if it even is going to matter. But if it's real, it's tough, and you kind of got to go Volk on that one.
Okay, so
despite Max deserving it.
Yep. Go ahead, Phil.
No, I was just thinking about the Mike Perry incident that I just seen recently, where he didn't have a damn coach. He had his girlfriend, and he ended up doing really well.
Whooping that ass. You get your girl in the corner, it's game over, bro. Are you kidding me? You can't. You don't want to embarrass yourself.
You can't lose.
Yeah.
You can't lose in front of your girl.
It's the Adrian
you can't do
factor.
it.
Yeah. No, Eric, it's real. And then lastly, Petr Yan against Jose Aldo. Let's go. So it's the third one. It's the title fight because Cejudo vacated. What you thinking on that one? Obviously, Aldo had his day. Back in the day, I love me some Aldo, but, Jan's kind of hungry. What you guys thinking? Phil, I'll start with you. Man,
I hate to go against Aldo, man, because he's just a legend. But I don't think he has it anymore, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't think he has anything left in the tank. I hate to see aging legends like that. I think that they need to, just retire on top as much as they can. And he had a good fight last couple fights, I believe. But I don't see him, making the next step. I think that one Conor loss. And then, he came back and won some others, but I don't see him, winning this fight. So, honestly, I see him getting knocked out, in my opinion. But we'll see.
Yeah. Seth?
I can't even pretend to disagree with you on this one. I don't think it's... I'd be really, really excited if it went the other way and Aldo's just incredible and he's bouncing off the walls and he's kicking the shit out of people, but I think it's over for him. It just, again, too many beatings.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just say that... It's incredible to me that Aldo is considered an old hat in MMA. And this is where kind of powerlifting, once again, is one of the beauties. You could be competing in your 30s and 40s. He is 33 years old. Like, he's 33 years old. And it's a genuine, but it's a genuine question. Like, is he done? That's not you guys hating. I mean, that's just the truth.
So crazy.
So let me go ahead.
I was gonna say, like Indy said, man, it's not the years, it's the miles. And these guys put on some serious miles.
No, it's true.
100%.
Eric, do we want to open up the floor now? Anything? Circle back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys are the experts here. So when we have awesome experts on with a lot of rich amount of knowledge, we acknowledge our own co-hosts as Dunning and Kruger, and we go, there might have been something we didn't cover. No. So at this point, we just want to open the floor to see, is there anything else that you guys feel, hey, if you're going to have this one episode on S&C for the fight game, we didn't even talk about X, Y, or Z. The floor is yours. Seth, anything that you think we should cover or you want to add that would be beneficial for the listeners of the Iron Culture?
I think talking about specificity might be important. I think we've touched on that a decent amount, but I really think movement specificity and exercise specificity is such a tricky topic right now. You get some guys who are like, I'm not a strike coach. I'm not going to put bands on someone and have them punch. I'm not going to give any type of feedback, and I'm going to keep it general the entire time. And then you get other folks who are kind of in the middle. And personally, the approach I've been taking lately is I look at like some of the greats, like Dan Pfaff, right? Like he's an S&C coach. He's a track coach. The man is a legend, right? I want to be that for boxing, and I want to start integrating more specificity. And I think that there's the potential to do some really, really cool things in the future. And it's an area I'd love to explore in the research is let's really get into specificity and transfer of the weight room to really specific movements. I mean, are we going to become Bondarchuk? Maybe. Like, I think that's the cool shit right now. And that's what gets me excited is whether it's a med ball pass or like Danny Wilson and those guys in boxing science, they love landmine throws. And for me, that doesn't quite make sense specificity wise, but maybe that's where it's at. And I really want to see a lot more of that and get into that. And I think that's where things kind of diverge from the Iron Culture a bit, because when you guys think S&C, you're thinking squats and deadlifts and bench press, which you need, that's your bread and butter. But I want to see banded punches and banded kicks potentially. I want to see med ball throws 100% that are very much following the lower body movement of a punch. I think that's where the real exciting stuff in S&C is going to be. And that's what keeps me going.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I think as someone who has both a background in strength and conditioning, but pretty much comes exclusively from the iron game myself, I see some of these systems and they make sense in track or athletics, depending on what country you're in and you're listening to this, because those are extremely closed sports. It's the same thing every time. But I do wonder how much in a sport where you're against an opponent, every fight is different. I'm not going to say it's either black or white, but I wonder how much can you go that direction versus something where you're a pole vaulter or et cetera. Because obviously in the iron game, there isn't any strength conditioning. You don't have your skills powerlifting coach and then your S&C for powerlifting. You just got a powerlifting coach, because we're like, our sports are training. They're essentially the same thing. And I think track and field is probably closer to that than it is fighting. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're totally right. And for me, I think a lot of this is based around boxing, more so because we have fewer degrees of freedom in boxing than we do in MMA, where things are just absolutely wild. But there still are basic fundamentals that are going to have to make sense, right? And again, it does go to knowing your fighter and knowing specificity, but a right cross is going to try and be the same right cross, and it's going to have the same fundamental attractors, right? So yeah, there's going to be variation throughout the movement, but X, Y, and Z are going to be the same just about every single time. And we've seen that in some of my research in ground reaction forces. And we know that from, again, anything studying movement patterns, dynamical systems theories, that we know that there are these key attractors to the movement. And if we can build, and I think that's why it's exciting for me, is I don't know what the movement is. I'm not trying to say, like, I got it, guys. But if we can build movements around those key attractors that are going to improve performance, that's when we can do something really special and different. But you're right, there is so much variation going on. And especially for like an MMA fighter, are you going to be able to have specific movements for everything they do? No. But maybe you got a guy who's a puncher and you need to work that right cross, and you can pull from boxing and use this one specific movement that we figured out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To piggyback off that, I would like to see, again, more directed assessments based off of the individual athlete's strengths, right? So again, I'm trying to look at, is what I'm doing in the weight room actually applicable and what is going to carry over into the fight for that individual, right? If they're a wrestler, I want to see how well they can hit that blast double based off of this sumo deadlift that we're doing or something along the lines of that, or any type of specificity of movement that we're doing inside the weight room. I just want to know what I'm doing is actually carrying over for that particular individual. Again, in all essence, like with MMA, it's an acyclical sport. There's not a whole lot of times where we're going to be going over and over again, but the movement pattern, let's say a jab right hand or a jab cross, is going to be the same. You know, again, there's up jabs, there's hooks and things of that nature, there's overhands, but if you're throwing a jab, it should look the same. And he was right with that. Seth was on point. Now, for me, and talking to a sports scientist, I'm talking with guys like Danny. You know, I had Danny on my podcast actually recently, and Danny actually came out to my seminar in London, and we talked about, you know, different ways to utilize the sports science world so that practitioners like myself can take that information and then put it to place. You know, and that's the one thing that I've been really, really looking at. And I talk with guys like Duncan French and Bo Sandoval over at the UFC PI. And there's so many things that we can do that we haven't been able to scratch the surface on just yet. But guys like Seth are helping us lead the way, because I need guys like him so that what I do in the weight room is going to have that direct correlation to the sport itself. So that's really what I want. That helps me be a better coach. That helps me get the results I need from my fighters. So with that being said, we always got to work with those guys that are in the labs really testing. And I got plenty of fighters. If you need lab rats, trust me, I got the highest level. So we can test the good ones.
Let's talk.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, one other thing, talking about Duncan, this was secondhand from a presentation he gave, so this might not be exactly correct, and I don't want to misquote Duncan in this, but basically the conversation was, we're doing all this amazing stuff at the PI. Like, we've got just incredible facilities and incredible coaches. They have some just really sharp people there. They're looking at all these different exercises and all these different training methods and going, what's going to lead to more performance? And the news I got back was, we got nothing. We don't know what's gonna carry over right now. Nothing seems to correlate very well to performance. That it's such a complicated sport that you're not going to be able to say, this is your number, and if this number goes up, you're going to do better. I don't think that's ever going to happen for us, but I do think we're going to get sharper and sharper at the little things. And again, from the big stones of injury mitigation to real explosive power and specifics.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you can really see out of a coach from a physical preparation standpoint, and I don't like to say strength and conditioning because that's not the only things we do. You know, I mean, there's plenty of things involved in it. But yeah, from a physical prep perspective, from a physiological prep perspective, like, I'm basically trying to make sure that they win the fight in all actuality, right? So at the end of the day, yeah, we can give that metrics, we can give that statistical data to show what we did actually work. But don't get me wrong, it don't mean shit if they don't win the fight. And they're not going to care either, to be honest with you, in all actuality.
Yep.
As a coach, as a practitioner, as a love for the sport, and wanting to be the best that I can be for my fighters, yes, I want to see that data. I want to see the progressions. But at the end of the day, I also want to see my guys win.
I can just guarantee, listening to you both, that no matter who is listening, if they're a S&C or a physical preparation coach for any sport, they're all nodding right now, because that's the holy grail. Every single S&C coach, what they want is, give me something that I can do in the gym, in my world, that correlates to something that probably correlates to whether or not you're going to win when you get on the field, in the ring, or on the platform. And I think that's probably going to continue to be the holy grail until we get some really cool steps forward in like modeling, training, and training response. So it's a tough thing, because I know if you talk to a lot of S&Cs, they'll be like, yeah, we got this like one test that's decent in this scenario for this specific case, but it's a low correlation, but it's there, it's reliable. And I think it's easy to kind of go, performance is too complicated, but it is, you know? It won't always be, and it doesn't mean that a battery couldn't get us there. And I think we do need to keep looking. But that's kind of cool, just to hear you guys talk about that same thing. Like, essentially, when you take a scientific approach, you would like to actually be able to take a scientific approach. I would love to be able to observe something that when I change this variable, it has some causative impact on that. And it's that's the constant, emperor's like, invisible clothes that we have in S&C is we don't really always know if what we're doing is actually going to help the person. It makes sense that it should, but man, wouldn't it be nice to have that confidence?
For sure.
Awesome.
Only they were all robots.
Absolutely. And we're not far away from having robots fight each other in rings. And you'd have to be, get a PhD in engineering to be an S&C coach, but one day. So
One day.
yeah, let me just say, I really appreciate the time, the energy, the expertise, the discussion, the nuance. I think you both killed it. I think I've learned that I know very few of the names that you guys mentioned at the very least, but more importantly, I learned a lot about kind of the perspective of a physical preparation coach for S&C or S&C, whatever you want to call it, for combat sports. And I just want to say thank you both.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, it's an honor, bro.
No, truly appreciate that, man. So with that, Omar, actually, before that, where can people find you? Phil, I don't know if you have, I don't know if you use the internet very often, but if people wanted to figure out where they could find more about
a YouTube
your
channel
content,
or like a website or
that,
like
I don't know.
Instagram.
Hey, I'm gonna come to Canada, and me and Omar are gonna do a training session together.
Ooh,
I'm in.
I'm gonna put you through an MMA-based training session, and you have to do some pad work too. So that's gonna be fun.
Bro, I'm in it. I'm going to put you through a McDonald's buffet challenge. Like, we're both going to challenge each other in different ways,
Let's do it. Yeah, man, my website is darustrong.com. My Instagram is darustrong, Twitter darustrong, and then I have the YouTube channels, Phil Darustrong. Very simple.
Yep.
Awesome. And Seth, if people want to get more engaged with your research or find out what you're doing, is there Twitter ResearchGate? What do we got for you, my man?
Yeah, I'm not really the social media guy. ResearchGate has my stuff on it. If you get on ResearchGate and send me a message, I will send you any research you want that I've done. But that's about it for me.
So
I have a Twitter, but I don't even know what it is.
Awesome. Well, definitely check out Seth Lenetsky. He's done truly some of the, I would say some of the pure, unique research on this area. There's not a whole lot on the biomechanics of striking. So if you're interested in that, that's your jam. Check it out. And again, thank you both, gentlemen. And Omar, I'm going to pass it over to you, the closeout king.
Thank you.
This episode.
Yeah, just before I do that, Seth, you said it was about a 0.5 R bench press to punching power. So here's the thing, man. I got like a 375 bench, so I'm knocking out Conor McGregor, right, is what you're saying? Like, this is what's going on here?
I think you would kill him. Literally, he would die.
Yeah.
That would be the end.
One
of him.
punch, right?
You're that good.
Yeah.
One punch man.
Yeah. Phil, every gym bro, because I'm sure, just real quick, you guys have both heard this in the weight room, Phil. Some of the lifts, they think they lift big, they bench like 4 plates, and like, so like, how good of a fighter would I be? And the answer's like, not at all. Like, no.
Has nothing to do with it.
Benji Raddick versus that bodybuilder. Benji fought in the UFC back in the day, and that bodybuilder knocked his head clean off. So it's a fight. Anyone's got a chance.
This is true. And I will make sure to include, I just want to echo exactly what Eric said. I want to thank you both, Seth and Phil, for coming on, expanding the culture, because that's what we want to do. Unite the culture under one roof. I will make sure to include both the social media of Phil and your ResearchGate, Seth, so people can find you. And I just want to thank everyone for making it all the way to the end. Even if you heard just about 80 or 90 names you've never heard before, you made it. Take a shot every time you did not recognize a name, and you'll be dead by the end of this. You could go ahead and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help us out. We're still, so yeah, sure, Joe Rogan's the top dog, but we're doing battle with the sexual health podcast. So we're normally we're number 30, 31. The Sex with Dr. Emily is like probably 29, 28. So we're behind her, not on top, or behind the podcast. We hope to leapfrog over. We'll see what happens. We'll do.
Talking about the sex. You talking about the sex thing? You talking about on top?
Just the ranking order. Just the ranking order. Merely the ranking order. Yeah. No, we're actually very scared about the sexual health podcast, if we're being honest. And then on YouTube, you could go ahead and leave a comment, and we'll do our best to respond. We're back every single Monday. We'll catch you then.